Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you also to all the attendees. This is a bit a strange experience for me, not seeing who's in the room, not seeing everyone. But anyhow, we'll try to work around this. Thank you also for overcoming the little technical issues that maybe some experienced. I'm very happy to be here with you with the Canadian chapter of the forum. Our session is going to think about working time. So basically, obviously, COVID caused a series of disruption for the workforce, and for some, obviously, the economic slowdown led to different ranges of temporary to permanent layoffs, while other workers experienced different changes in the way they actually performed work. So, as we all know, the pandemic drew a new categorization of workers, some being deemed essential workers and some now being deemed, I guess, non-essential workers. At least there's this new categorization of workers that emerged from the pandemic. So in terms of working time, what we've seen is that what so-called essential workers are now experiencing extended working hours, several changes to the work schedules, while the other category of workers have been. I think Abdullah left us. He'll probably be back shortly. While other workers have rapidly had to switch to telework and working from home. At the peak of the pandemic, it's about 40% of the Canadian workforce that was actually teleworking. So the session today was designed to discuss the issues of, I'm just looking at Abdullah here while I'm talking. Okay, here. The session today is to think about the reference points of working time. And basically, as we know, they already before the pandemic grew more and more fragile. And how did the pandemic actually change these reference points of working time? We also think about where we actually work that is intimately linked to working time. So to discuss this today, we have the immense privilege of having 4 speakers that I will now proceed to present. First one being Abdullah Raed, who is from Gig Workers United in Canada and also a gig worker himself. Lisa Schofield, who's an organizer at the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Pierre-Samuel Proux, who's an acting senior research officer at the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and my colleague Emilie Genin, who's a professor at the School of Industrial Relations at the University of Montreal. So we convened today that the way we would proceed was more in an informal fashion, more in terms of a roundtable. I will ask several sets of questions. We will try to foster a discussion. And please, dear attendees in the room, do not hesitate to use the chat to ask questions. I will try to bring them together and bring them in conversation with our speakers. So please do not hesitate. If any attendee would want at the end of the session jump in the conversation, actually talk or express a point of view or a question, you're also welcome to do so by I guess opening your mic and your camera. So thank you all very much. I guess the first question I'll ask, and I'll let it up to our speakers to decide who wants to go first, would be, so just to situate your work and how you've been looking at this issue of working time in the past months or years. Can you tell us what group of workers you've been working with, and who do you represent basically in your everyday work? Who wants to go?
I can go first, I guess. So, well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss about this very important topic. As you said, I'm working with the Public Service Alliance of Canada. So we represent over about 200,000 workers in Canada, including about 120,000 federal public service worker. But not only though, not all of our member works for the federal government or departments, as some work for agencies or crown corporation. Also, we represent members in universities, in casinos, community services, airports, among others. So we also represent a very diverse field of workers in private and public entities. And for sure, this has a huge impact on the perspective that I'm going to bring to this discussion. And I'm mostly going to talk about the perspective of a public service worker that we represent working at the federal government level, because this is, especially with them, we're embarking now, and this is where we are trying to tackle some of these challenges regarding hours of work right now.
Abdullah, Lisa?
Sure, I can go. So I work with couriers in the Greater Toronto area and beyond. So app-based delivery workers, folks who work on apps like Uber Eats, Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, Flex, Instacart, Corner Shop, et cetera, and formerly with Foodora couriers as well. So the campaign began as Foodsters United, Justice for Foodora Couriers, many years ago. Not many years ago, a couple years ago, 3 years ago. And has transitioned to now be Gig Workers United. So all app-based delivery workers in the Greater Toronto area, organizing with CUPW.
My name is Abdullah Raid. I'm a part with Gig Worker United. I joined before Foodora left the market. I'm a gig worker too. I deliver food and grocery with Instacart, Uber, Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, and I'm on waiting list with Amazon. And I'm barely fighting for our rights, and that's barely it.
Emilie?
Hi everybody, I'm Emilie Genin. I'm a colleague of Dalia at Université de Montréal, and I've been working on working time for nearly 20 years. Actually, I started with my PhD dissertation, and I studied time porosity, which means the intersection and the interferences between personal time and working time. And well, right now with the pandemic, it has obviously been a big disruption and a lot of things to study.
Thank you. So I guess that thank you for this brief presentation of your work. I guess the first question I'd ask you is, with regards to the specific groups of workers that you're working with or you're interested in, what are maybe the specific challenges that they face with regards to working time, maybe more specifically? So maybe we could turn the table around and start with Emilie, if that's fine with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dalia. First thing, the blurring of boundaries between personal time and professional time, it's not something new. It was even before the pandemic. The spread of mobile technology and the post-industrial production models like the gig economy or production models requiring employees' flexibilities, the intensification of work. All this disruption in the traditional 4D production model has led to greater interferences between working time and non-working time. With the pandemic, obviously, and the spread of telework, we observed an acceleration and an intensification of this blurring that I call time porosity, as I said. One of the challenges is that working time historically has been constructed as a collective norm with a 9 to 5, and for mainly men working outside home on a regular basis, days in, days off, with the holidays and so on. So historically, the construction of working time was around a collective norm. Right now, with the blurring and of boundaries between personal time and professional time and the pandemic and so on, we have a vast diversity of situations. So we can say, I think, that the collective norm of working time has exploded. It's no longer collective, and we face a multiplication of individual temporalities. So the question to me is, what do we do next because where we had collective interest, for example, the reduction of working time, more paid holidays, or collective revendication and claims around working time, right now, it's much more difficult for employees, for workers, to find collective interest regarding working time, because for some employees the problem is that they don't have enough payout, so they would like to work more, and for others the problem is the intensification and the extension of work. For example, in Quebec we have a big question with nurses, so we have divergences of interest. Let's give some example. For example, telework. Some people are very happy with telework and they do want to telework most of the time, but not all of them. Some people were very eager to go back to work. Another example, for example, is overwork. In some industries, for instance, the construction industries, overtime is a privilege. So in collective agreements, you try to make overtime the more equal as possible, with a priority list to work overtime. When you look at nurses, it's a curse. The overtime is a huge problem, for example, here in Quebec. And when you look at the collective agreement of nurses, it's still treated as a privilege, with a priority list to work overtime. So that doesn't reflect at all the reality that nurses live on the ground. So we have a divergence of interest. And to me, one of the big question is, what do we do with the melting of a collective working time now in different interests, different individual activities, and more diverse situation. Second problem, and then I'll stop, is working time. Working time was basically used to limit and measure working time and to protect both employees and employers. And right now, what we are seeing is that work hours and working time is an imperfect tool to measure, protect, and limit work, because work, the requirements, for example, of employers can go far beyond of working time. For example, employers can ask for the employees' availability. You are not at work, but you are required to be available in case they need you at work. So how do we pay for this availability? So working time is an imperfect tool to measure, limit, and protect work. The problem that we have is it's the only tool that we have. Historically, there was a confusion. There was they were identical. I mean, work was measured by working time. So now we will need to concentrate on work activities and to find maybe other tools. Working hours are a good tool to measure, protect, and limit work, but we need other tools to encompass, to comprehend the new reality of a lot of workers, and for example, gig workers.
Well, that sets the table very well, I think, for the rest of the conversation. Thank you very much, Emilie. Who wants to jump in next? Abdullah, Lisa, maybe?
I'll go first. So, working time. I started delivering late 2017, and I was planning to do this for a short time, like around 3 to 6 months. And I'm still doing it up till now. I started doing 2-3 hours a day. I ended up doing up to 18 hours a day. I don't know when is long weekends. I work all days, all week, all year. Christmas time, New Year, Thanksgiving. I don't have any difference. Working limit, there's no working limit. I know some platforms, they give us a limit of working, but they really don't follow that in the platform. So some days I work up to 18 hours. When I do 18 hours, I'm worried, I'm scared, I'm afraid about my health, my family too. I don't have quality time I don't have with my family. I don't have time with friends. Actually, I don't have friends. Work is consuming all my time. There's no overpay. When we don't have orders or the customers change the tab, when we lose our wages, there's no one to fight for us. When we have accident, no access to platform because of no internet connection, or my phone is damaged due an accident, no one covers me for that. I don't have any paid break. Also, 5 minutes a day within my 18 hours of work. No, I don't have breaks. I don't have paid holidays. Uh, it's being very hard to control this, and like working time, I really don't have working time. It's just wake up, start delivering food and grocery till the midnight, till the last minute that I can do it.
Thank you. Lisa, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, what we see with gig work is really a complete and total erosion and lack of a work day. There's no 8 hours. You know, the historic gains of an 8-hour working day is a distant memory when we talk about gig work. A 40-hour work week cap, non-existent. Overtime, non-existent. Any protections in terms of, like Abdullah's talking about, a break, non-existent. So I think it's a really scary erosion of rights. And we're talking about a base of workers that are, misclassified as independent contractors. They're told they're independent contractors, but have zero control over the app. They don't control the app. The app tells them exactly what order they pick up, where it goes to, how much you're getting paid. It's not a negotiation. And I come out of tree planting. I was a tree planter for many years in Ontario and Alberta and BC. And like the idea of your labor is attached to an item where you're paid piecework. Your labor is attached to, you're paid per tree in tree planting, and in gig work, you're paid per delivery, per package. Parcel that you're delivering, whether it be food, a box of food, or an Amazon package. And with rideshare drivers, it's based on the delivery of the person from point A to point B. So it's removing any concept of time. And what we see with workers is, they have no concept of when work time ends and personal time begins, because there's no ability to have personal time. There's no pay for weekends or holidays. There's no holidays. There's no weekends. Everything bleeds into each other. And I think it's a really dangerous erosion and a really dangerous precedent we're seeing. It's bleeding into many sectors. So.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll come back to that question, as how are those models kind of bleeding in other sectors and kind of becoming the meta model that's influencing the way basically the work is regulated. But before that, maybe Pierre Samuel, if you can give us an idea of the challenges that the workers you work with are facing.
Yes, certainly. I think the comparison with Gig Workers United is going to be interesting, because of course we have what the employer likes to call a very mature collective agreement in the Federal Public Service. They're 50 years old, the collective agreement that have been renegotiated many times with really set working conditions. But still, that concept of bleeding, I think it's interesting, because some of the challenge I'm going to discuss here are I think orientation, where the employer wants to bring us more and more, in line with what they call flexible work. But this flexible work, and we're going to get into it probably later in the session, but has really some, I think, dangerous aspect to for our members. But I mean, one thing I should mention probably from the get-go is that right now, a third of our members working at the core federal public sector are working from home. So when you were mentioning at the beginning about the difference, between the essential worker and non-essential worker, I don't know if we can make directly that a distinction here with the perfect correlation between working from home or not, because we do have workers that are working from home, but I guess we could call their work essential. For example, there are members at the Canada Revenue Agency that worked on the Canadian Emergency, the CRB, benefits that were offered to the public. So most of that work was done from home by our members, but still essential. But nonetheless, I think it's important first to note that a lot of our members are still working from home at this moment, and one thing that we did to learn a little bit more about how the pandemic had changed some of the working condition of our members is we did a survey where we had about 10,000 respondents of our only our federal public sector workers responding. And we asked them several questions leading up to our round of bargaining with the Treasury Board of Canada. But some of the interesting results that came from that survey were one, when we surveyed our members' likeness to want to continue working remotely, full-time or part-time, after when the pandemic is forcing a kind of return to work. 80% of our respondents of our survey said that they were extremely, or at least somewhat likely to want to continue working remotely. So when you were mentioning that this is popular, it certainly is very, very popular with our members, and a large majority is working to at least continue part-time working from home. And also, these workers were a lot more likely to request flexible working hours or arrangement from their employer when they were working from home. So when we're mentioning flexible working arrangements, is sometimes replacing a day of work during the weekday, during the week for a weekend day, or working late, working until 9 or 10 at night. So all of these arrangements that we would really seldomly see in a worker working from the office, and still we don't see that often. There is a huge difference between the number of people working from the office that are requesting these kind of arrangements, mostly because they are a lot more difficult to put in place when you are working at the office, than when you are working from home, where it feels more easy to just connect to your computer from at night or really early in the morning to fit your schedule. So this is one thing that we've seen really taking some traction with our members. And it does create two groups though. So it does create the groups of the people who are working, still working in the workplace, so I don't have access to this kind of new flexibility that some workers enjoy, and the workers that are working from home who are using some of these flexible options. But we still wanted to know a little bit more about, some of the barriers that our members working from home were facing. And interestingly, and not surprisingly, I should say, is the one of the main takeaway was the fact that a third of our members said that they were having trouble getting away from work when they were working from home. And the key takeaway was the constant connection to a mobile device, and the rise of remote work had really, as we mentioned in the beginning, blurred the line between their work life and their personal life. So we went even a little bit further and asked what was their perceived expectation for them doing work outside of their regular hours, and responding to emails from their manager outside of regular hours. And 1 out of 5 said that they were more than once in a week they felt like they had to respond to work communication outside of regular working hours, because they felt like this is what their manager was expecting. And in the context where 70% of our members declared that they had the feeling that their workload had increased also during the last year. So we were seeing this pattern then of increased workload, and this increased workload really spilling over outside of the normal, what we would call the normal workday, usually for our members.
Thank you, Pierre Samuel. It's very interesting. I think also maybe later on we can come back on how the pandemic kind of revealed these two groups of workers, and kind of like the issue that can arise in the same collectivity of workers where you have two groups not being able to cater to the same kind of arrangements or working conditions. And what I think, maybe we'll take this question a little later, but I think the question there is interesting for unions, as per how does that change the way you intervene with different subgroups in your groups on the specific issue of working time. So I think you all kind of tackled the issue, but I think that the next question I feel like asking is, and I feel like starting with Abdullah, like what did the pandemic change in your everyday work in terms of working time, in terms of, we all know that delivery services really were more and more popular in the context of the pandemic, and what did that concretely change this pandemic in in the way everyday work has to be performed for gig workers in terms of work and working time? Yeah, so maybe start with Abdullah, and then we can go around again.
Thank you. So when the pandemic started, we noticed an increase in the orders and in the pay, but that was like for almost, I can say, 5 to 8 weeks, and then all platforms, they updated their application, and we can see suddenly decrease in the tab, decrease in the base pay, and they changed the system. And when the system is changed, we were not updated about that. Our contracts were not changed. For me, as like I'm like when they say that I'm independent contractor, so I should put my own rate, but I can't really do that. What they do is they're playing a game where they lower the base pay, they add you a surge or a boost, or like an extra income or a bonus or whatever they call it, and the total is less. And by that, they're taking our wages lower and lower. And this is still ongoing up to now. At the beginning of the pandemic, with like 4 to 6 orders in 1 hour, I could make up to $40. That was somehow between March to May 2020. And after May, June, all the apps were updated, and I barely make 16 to 20 per hour when it's busy. If it's not busy, I might make up to $8-9 per hour. $8-9 without removing my income tax and my expenses. When we talk about the pandemic, I didn't have my BBE. It was out of stock in the market, and because of the nature of my job, I don't know when to start or when to stop. I don't know when is my personal time or when is my shopping time. So I couldn't have time to go and search in the market for masks, hand sanitizers, and all BBE required. Those platforms didn't provide it in early stages, and when they provided us with BBE, it was already in the market. We can get it easily at that time. Our income, even like pandemic has been like for a long time. It affected us in many ways. When we look at, like, if I'm talking about my car maintenance, like gas or regular maintenance, everything is going higher, but our wages is going lower. If I plan to change my car, I can see like an increase in all new car price due to COVID, but not my income. My income is going down. So I can't afford new vehicle. I can't maintain it. And this is like, for me, I didn't change my tires since 3 years. This is very risky. This is unsafe, and I can't do anything about it. I don't have support in that. And if I go to buy a new car, they'll be like, hey, what are you doing? I'm a gig worker. I work with 5 to 7 platforms in the last 4 years. Oh, we don't accept that income. It's risky. It's unstable income. So we really misclassified in this too. And this affects everyone who do gig shops.
Thank you, Abdullah. I think it's also extremely interesting in understanding how the models that are driven by the app change very rapidly, and basically they adapt to a never-changing context, but in a very fast fashion. Whereas Abdullah said, and I find that's extremely important to underline, that the wages were going up during the first weeks of the pandemic because there was more and more demand, but then the working conditions got changed by the app without obviously consultation with the workers, and which caused a downward pressure on the working conditions. I find that's also something to think about here when we think of, the models that are set by certain enterprises and certain employers and basically that structure, again, very heavily the wage and the way people are compensated, workers are compensated, and that has a direct effect, like Abdullah said, on the time spent working, because obviously if your wages are going more and more down, you'll be working more and more to avoid your economic risk. So thank you for that, Abdullah. I think that's something that we have to collectively think about in terms of, again, models that these companies and these employers are forging and that can bleed in other sectors and other types of working arrangements. I don't know, Lisa, if you want to kind of add on to what the pandemic kind of, if it turned certain table or, as Emilie said, accelerated certain tendency that we were already seeing in the sector that you work in.
Yeah, well, I mean, with gig workers were deemed as essential workers, allowed to continue to be working out there, taking huge risks, taking huge personal risk. But with, as Abdullah said, no protections, and then spending their own time in a day where they don't have time to try and find their own PPE, figure out their own health and safety, attending meetings that we would hold, about how to keep ourselves safe, and the union taking on the role of trying to figure out how we get masks to people. And so we would acquire a bunch of masks. We had a bunch of, people's parents sewing masks, or allies out there in labor world sewing masks. This was when it was too hard to get masks. And then we would be out delivering them to each other. And Abdullah would pick up masks from me and help deliver them to other drivers. And that's like on his own time, on all the workers' own time. Like the responsibility to figure out health and safety was downloaded, like everything is downloaded for gig workers. It was downloaded to the individual to figure it out. Just figure it out. Spend your own time, spend your own money, figure it out. If you get sick, you get sick. And a lot of our members did get sick. And it was very scary in those beginning months. And I think it remains scary, to today, with zero compensation. And at first, when the federal government announced CERB, they didn't include gig work. They didn't include independent contractors within it. And so gig workers were going to be completely left out of being able to access CERB, and also didn't have any paid sick days. So there was just like a complete, oh, we want you to keep making it possible for everyone else to stay home, but we're giving you absolutely nothing. No parachute, no sick days, no PPE, absolutely nothing. I think it's just, it really unveiled another piece of what it's like for precarious workers in Canada and everywhere in the world, and that it's precarious workers who were holding up the rest of society, yet treated completely unfairly. And relating it to, working time, it's, all of that was done on their own time, all of the taking care of themselves, figuring out what to do when they got sick, taking time off when they got sick, figuring out how to try and get their landlord to put off rent because they couldn't afford rent. All of that is done on workers' own time, which is unacceptable, completely unacceptable.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, maybe I'd like to also, if when we're talking about couriers, even that are not gig workers, what are maybe the issues in terms of working times and the more tensions that could have arisen with the pandemic? Can you talk a bit more about that? If we compare to the reality of gig workers, other maybe postal workers or other workers in other types of activities that actually do the service of couriering. Can you maybe address a little portrait of that rapidly?
Well, gig delivery workers in Toronto call themselves couriers, and as part of CUPW Courier Local 10-4, which is an old courier local, which is the shirt I'm wearing. So Gig Workers United, like the gig workers, see themselves as couriers. But in terms of, it's similar kind of issues with postal workers, is delivering parcels, delivering packages to condo buildings, for instance. People want things to go to their door. But in condo buildings in Toronto, it was like these long lineups to wait for the elevator, or risk going in a really overcrowded elevator to try and get up to the 20-something floor to deliver your parcel. So all of these kind of like risk assessments on the spot, being like, do I make my workday go longer because I have X amount of parcels to deliver, or do I go in an overcrowded elevator to go up? And workers having to figure this out on the spot, especially for non-unionized workers, having to figure out that health and safety on the spot. For unionized workers, for postal workers, there is protections and safety in place, right, to be able to say no to unsafe conditions. And we tried to, with gig delivery workers, we tried to say, like, workers have the right to refuse to go up elevators, go up unsafe elevators. They deserve a joint health and safety committee with these corporations during the midst of this pandemic. And all the corporations just threw their hands up in the air and said, well, we're not even going to acknowledge that you requested this. So left always to the workers to figure out.
Thank you. I find that's also an interesting dimension, and maybe Pierre Samuel, you can draw parallels to, obviously in a different work environment, but how occupational health and safety issues were basically transferred into the personal time of the workers to kind of figure that out in terms of having the proper equipment, but also, do you wait in line to have less people in the elevator, expanding maybe your working day and putting pressure on the number of hours that you're working. So basically, again, linked to the work organization and both intensification and extensification of work. So, Pierre Samuel, do you want to maybe, I know you spoke already about what the pandemic changed, but maybe if you could give us maybe more concrete examples of how like the pandemic changed the dynamic, maybe in terms of how did the employer before the pandemic foresee telework and flex work arrangements? Did that change anything in terms of how the employer perceived it and how he's thinking about it and for the next bargaining period? Maybe if you can tell us a bit about that.
Yes, certainly. There's one of the interesting aspect is that it definitely completely changed on the employer side their perception of telework. So it used to be a really case by case decision where a manager, depending on the work being done by an employee, would grant access to a telework agreement that was a very, very formal agreement where the employee had a lot to do to be able to prove that their workplace was secure. So basically their house, they had an insurance, they had the ergonomic chair and everything. And so because the employer had to, of course, still uphold to the Canada Labor Code Part 2 of occupational health and safety. So so this was a really small percentage of employees working in the federal government that were able to telework. And of course, what the pandemic changed is that and I'm certain the employer would even agree with me, is that it completely changed their perception because they were persuaded that for most employee, remote work wouldn't be working, that employee wouldn't be able to focus on the work, they wouldn't be able to be as productive really as they are in the workplace. And I think this this perception was completely shattered by the pandemic and by the work that was done during it, because what we've seen and what even the employer now acknowledges is that a lot of employees have been thriving, sometime even too much, because as we mentioned earlier, for some employees, the work became really blurred with their personal life. They started working, I think, more than they were even working when they were at the actual workplace. A lot of the discussion we had with some employees was that when they were going to the workplace, they actually had to really there was kind of a limit on work, like at the workplace they were working, and when they were stepping out of the office, then this was, they were thinking about something else. But you don't always have that kind of, physical limit when you're working from home, which is sometimes making it more difficult for some people. So this was certainly an important aspect, which led the employer to now, in some department and some agencies, to really speed up the process of getting rid of actual offices and asking their employees to start working remotely full-time for the foreseeable future. So what we've heard is that some of our members are now hearing from their manager that, if they're willing to telework, or even sometimes they're not being asked if they're willing to telework. And I think that's a very important aspect to it, because although I mentioned that 80% of our members wanted to telework, it still leave 1 out of 5 who doesn't want to telework. Like going to the office, like having that separation in their life between their work life and their personal life. They had sometimes privacy issues, or they just like hanging out with colleagues in person. So for all sorts of reasons, some people don't like to work remotely, and they like being able to go to the workplace. And what we've seen in something that we're trying to also discuss with the employer and fix in collective bargaining is that some of them are being forced to telework, even if they're not interested in doing it. And there's not really right now anything saying, we hadn't foresee really a future where the table would be turned, and where most of our employees were more interested in teleworking and the employer was saying no. Now it's the reverse. Some employees want to go back to the office, and it's the employer telling them, no, you're not able to go back to the office. So it's certainly an interesting situation that we're trying right now to resolve.
Thank you. That's also very interesting, because I was rereading a report from Statistics Canada, and basically that was saying that employees generally that were teleworking generally said that they were more productive. But then when you cross the data, and that was something that was done by StatsCan, when you cross the data, you realize that workers might consider that they were more productive. But if you look at the number of hours that were worked per week, that went up also during the pandemic. So, you have to. So I think that as you said, Pierre Samuel, it's an interesting change of I think paradigm in terms of how the employers see it, because if they thought it was maybe something that could affect negatively productivity, now they realize productivity is going up because working hours are going up. It's something that also is often drawn together. So thank you very much. Maybe Emilie, a few words on this, but in your perspective, I know that you already said that the pandemic likely accelerated some tendencies that we were seeing before, but do you have any other comments on what was said just now?
Yes, 2 quick comments. I was listening to Lisa and Abdullah, and in Quebec, you may know we had a curfew, and one additional problem for a delivery worker is that they were constantly arrested by the police because they were authorized to deliver, but we had control. So that was additional time, and the delivery was late, so that had consequences on their work. And another problem is that many of them don't speak French. So there's a different factor to consider. And to add to what Pierre Samuel said on telework, now it's very clear, and what research shows is that the biggest health and safety issue of telework is not that workers do not work. The biggest issue is that they work too much, and that they end up in burnout. So it's documented and it's quite clear, but the message is difficult to vehiculate through employers that no, because what we've seen with the generalization of telework is people have no limit and were not conscious. For example, it became normal to phone or to make a cell phone at 6:30 in the morning, something that you would have never done before, or to send emails at 8 or 9 in the evening. So And these things get normal and people get used to it. And now the question is, how do we come back to something maybe more civilized? I don't know how to call that, but you know, a big themes we have in HR is civility in the workplace. And maybe that's something it's decent work we were talking about, but I definitely think civility at work is part of the big picture.
Can I just add one quick thing too, which is also the aspect of, for parents, the double workload throughout the pandemic for parents, which, you know, for some employers, maybe for those who are working online, allowed for, you know, some flexibility around the workday to make it possible for people to also parent with their kids at home. For precarious workers, it was about like figuring out who can take care of kids, who can go out at night to work late into the night doing deliveries, just like so many other considerations to take into place for parents, some parents having to, you know, bring their kids with them, going to work. Like, it's just, I think it's been a really, really rough go of that double duty all day, every day for a lot of parents. And it not being, obviously that's not compensated ever or taken into account. But I think that another point you made, Emilie, around burnout, like I worry about the mental health of so many workers post-pandemic and the level of burnout that so many workers are coming up against, of like, you know, not only how much people had to work during the pandemic and how work time has bled into everything, how much gig workers had to work just to try and survive, and take in all of that fear of health and safety on their own shoulders. It's just, you know, now there's no ability to, you know, take a break. There's no paid time off to take a break and recover in any way at all whatsoever, which makes me worried for people having to go forward and keep working and keep going.
Thank you, Lisa. Before we tackle, and I see some attendees are writing in the chat, please feel free to ask questions, to post comments. I will come back to all the comments and all the questions through this conversation. So before we tackle the issue of how do we, like, what can legal regulation and collective organization to do this, I'd like to still ask a question, and we had discussed this in previous meetings with some of you. I'd like to hear about the maybe we'll start with Pierre Samuel. Did you guys think of the differentiated effects on for instance, women that have parental responsibilities or family responsibilities, but also people that are composing with disabilities and that don't necessarily have the appropriate means to actually work extended hours and from home sometimes? So was that a conversation that you're having right now with your members in the perspective of the next round of bargaining? So I just maybe wanted to raise that question, and maybe Emilie after, if you want to jump in on that.
Sorry, forgot to. Sorry. It's a very important question, and we actually so the government, and most people would know that by different names, but the government workers, especially at the beginning of the pandemics, where a lot of them were able to be on leave with pay when, you know, the offices were closed, and even the workers who really had to be at the office, you know, were representing blue collar workers, plumbers, carpenters, people that they couldn't really do their work without having to go physically somewhere. Were still, you know, able to receive their full pay and be on leave. And so that was notably because of great language we had in our collective agreement that was essentially stating that, you know, leave with pay will be given when an employee is preventing from reporting to duty for circumstances that are beyond their control. But what happened is that with time, the employer quickly tried to find solution to, you know, force some of these employees to provide some work. So, and one of their solution was really asking them, because sometimes it was also, there was people who had duty of care, so for either children or an elderly member of their family, they had all sorts of situation, disabilities that prevented them from working remotely. But the employer started asking those people to find a way to work outside of the traditional hours of work. So if we take the example of a family, let's say a single parent who really couldn't work because the childcare was closed or the school was closed, so they had to take care of their family during the day. Well, the employer said, well, now you're either going to have to spend your own leave, or you're going to work really early in the morning or late at night, and you're going to give us some kind of work in exchange for that leave with pay that we're giving you during the day. And so we have actually grieved. We've put forward a policy grievance, which is yet to be heard in front of the board, because essentially on the grounds that this was just discrimination on those workers that were sometimes more vulnerable and for all sort of reasons couldn't do that kind of work and shouldn't have to compensate by working late at night when they already did a full day of work taking care of someone during the day or whatever. So it's something right now that's pending, but certainly it's an important issue that we agreed. The other thing that I wanted to really quickly touch upon is what Emilie mentioned. So about respect and workers, where we do hear that sending emails, communication at night, and so what we and this word has been like trending lately, but what we've been looking at is really a right to disconnect. And I mean, we know that this concept emerged a few years ago in France, notably, where a law was passed, and other countries that ended up a right to disconnect legislation. And we don't currently have that in Canada, although there was some consultation that were done. So what we're trying is to negotiate right to disconnect language in the collective agreement, where it would really reinforce our members' rights when there's this expectation for them to engage in work-related communication outside of normal working hours. But essentially, the only thing we can do is really clarify that there shall be no disciplinary action or reprisal or consequences on the employee performance review for an employee exercising this right, because what we've seen is the collective agreement already give our employees the right to disconnect, right? They could if they were to respond to an email outside of their normal working hours, technically they could ask for overtime for doing that work outside of their normal working hours. But what we've seen is they don't do it. And that's a whole problem. So although they already have that right, the reason why they don't do it is, of course, because of the pressure. Like, I mean, that's what we've been hearing the most, is that although the collective agreement already provided a framework around hours of work, the employers can favor employees who respond to work-related communication outside of working hours, and so that, of course, create this incentive, like it incentivizes workers to do such behavior for to get some more promotion or bonuses. So and this, in return, to loop back to your first question, really kind of unfairly disadvantage workers who are unable to remain connected after work due to their family responsibilities, health reason, or connectivity issues.
Thank you. I don't know, Emilie, if you want to jump in on this or quickly.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about your third question about avenues and saying, basically, I want to spot something in the regulatory system and in labor law. As all what we've heard since the beginning of this session is that one is the problem to me is that 1 hour is not equal to 1 hour, because all the working time and pay has been constructed on this idea that, okay, 1 working hour is equal to another working hour. But that's not true, because we have overtime. And how come, for example, for gig workers, there's no overtime, and working on Sunday morning morning, I'm sorry, it's not equal to working on Monday morning. So this desynchronization of working time and the extension of working time during weekends, evenings, and so on. Everybody is criticizing and denouncing here, has to be addressed in somehow. And the work status, obviously there's an intersection between work status, precarity, and working time. And well, there are some avenues, for example, the right to disconnect that has been implemented in France. I'm French, basically, and it's not that big success till now. The results are mitigated, and I think that there's also avenues, for example, on-call workers. How can we imagine a way to pay for waiting time when someone is expecting work? Okay, is that the disposition of the employers? So on-call workers, how do we regulate more on-call works and fight again forms of contracts such as zero-hours contracts? That should be made totally impossible. That's unacceptable. So it has to do with decent work. And my last point is that I guess this working time question should be resituated in a more social question. And it's no less than, in what kind of society do we want to live collectively? Because in one research I've conducted with some colleagues here, based on 9,000 parents of preschool-age children in Quebec, we've seen a correlation between atypical work hours, working on weekends, evenings, and so on, and the quality of parenting. I mean, working desynchronized hours, atypical schedules does not make it possible to have quality parenting behavior. For example, reading stories, playing with kids, and we've observed more negative parenting behavior like shouting and so on. So this has a direct effect on the development of our child, or of our children. So the impact of this working time questions, to me, it's much more larger than just, okay, how much do you gonna pay? But it's the future generation, is how do we care for future generation? We were talking about parents, about work-life balance of parents, mental health of parents. And well, I think we should articulate more this working time question to social questions.
Thank you, Emilie. That's also a very interesting way of thinking it. And you, Emilie, already spoke about kind of how the legal framework is thought of. And I think that's maybe the last set of questions. Time is flying. So maybe if we can look at like the current legal frameworks, either Employment Standards Act or obviously collective agreements in the Pierre Samuel's case. So what are these legal frameworks adapted? What are, if not, what are the promising avenues? What are these in terms of collective organizing? What's the challenges that you face? All these sets of questions. I don't know if maybe Lisa, you want to start, and then we'll pursue with Abdullah, as you wish.
Sure. I mean, right now we're in a real battle internationally on the framework and the legal framework for gig workers. And Emily, you were talking about, what frameworks can we put around on-call work? And Uber right now is fighting in the UK. There was a Supreme Court decision that they needed to account for all working time. So that waiting time, when someone is waiting for an order, waiting for a ride, that should be, when you're on the app, that should be counted as working time. But Uber is fighting to have it just be engaged time, right? So And that's sort of a framework that they're trying to force here as well, is this understanding of just engaged time. Engaged time is when you actively have an order. You actively are delivering it. You're not being paid for being on the app, waiting for an order. And Abdullah can speak more about that for sure. And like the battle internationally around the misclassification issue is, in a lot of places, workers are challenging misclassification and winning good legal decisions on the right to be employees, the right to be considered as workers, the right for all their time to be accounted for. But then we see Uber responding with trying to bring legislation to Canada to create a third category of contractor plus, or what they call flexible work plus, is their proposal, which is, I think, a really, really scary proposition, a really scary potential further erosion that I really encourage people to look at. Read about Uber's flexible work plus proposal, because it's coming. They're bringing it to every single province and lobbying every single provincial government in Canada. And this is their attempt to kind of thwart that resistance from workers themselves. I can speak to some of the what I see as promising, which is that the workers organizing is determined. It's creative. It's looking outside of the usual kind of frameworks of union organizing. And I think workers are determined to win and not backing down and pushing for full rights. But I can pass it to Abdullah to talk more about that and talk about what it means to not be paid for that waiting time.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll try to be quick. I need to touch on some points. So Lisa previously mentioned about waiting on the elevator. So some customers would like to have their order delivered for free. Even if we waited on the elevator, we put our health on risk, and we go up to, like, sometime it take up to 25 minutes. We go to the condo door, we leave the order at the door, we take a picture, and we leave. Customer claims that they never received it, or it was late for 25 minutes. They don't know what the driver were doing at their condo place, and then we lose our tab because they have 24 hours to change the tab, and this affects our pay dramatically. Paid while waiting, we don't get paid while waiting, and if I might understand this in case of there's no orders or there's no rides, but this is not the case. So I had met with other couriers where someone is 5 years with Uber, the other one is only 2 months with Uber. So the 2-month guy will have more orders than the 5 years guy, so he can get attached more to Uber. And sometimes even with Skip the Dishes, with DoorDash, with Instacart, they all have the same. Instacart also uses, if Abdul, I usually get more Costco orders, so they show me Costco orders before other couriers, but other couriers which they prefer smaller orders like Dollarama and Shoppers, they will see that orders before me. So they're kindly controlling how the orders is distributed to people. Paid while waiting, so sometimes you wait in the restaurant for like 15 minutes or at the customer door for 5 minutes. We don't get paid for that even. And what worries me is we don't have the right to refuse. As like after I get the order, I write to the restaurant, they said we need 20 minutes. If I rejected the order, I lose my full pay. I can't really refuse it. I also don't have the right to know. So when Uber give me 10 seconds to accept the order, I don't have the right to know if the order is ready or not. And within 10 seconds while driving my car, I need to look into my screen. It's very risky. It's very dangerous. I don't have enough time. And some other apps like Skip the Dishes give me 60 seconds, but within those 60 seconds, if I'm late and it's a busy time and they want to have a better service, at 50 seconds, my mobile app jams. So they give it to other driver and it will look like it's my issue. We don't have uncertainty like the uncertainty of our pay. We don't know how much is our wages is it 20 per hour, is it $10 per hour? So if my rent is 2,000 a month, how much hours should I work next month? I have no idea, because it's uncertainty of pay. About parenting, if I want to touch on that, so a lot of couriers were like trying to decrease their interact with their kids because they're worried that they catch COVID. As our nature of job, we need, like, if I want to do 10 orders, that means 10 restaurants and 10 customers. That means 10 different buildings, 10 different restaurants. 10 orders means 20 different doors. Even if I'm wearing masks, hand sanitizers, it's a bit risky. So when we keep that distance between our kids, we don't talk to our kids, it's affecting their mental health. This will have a big impact in the future. Touching on what challenges, it's very challenging. It's very challenging to organize, to talk to each other. As I said, if you're late, the customer want to have a free delivery, they will complain, they will remove the tab. So if I want to organize with other couriers, I can do this because they want to run back to work. Although they work hard, they try to work faster, to be ethical, to deliver the food with like fast, timely manner. Still, they don't get any extra pay, no appreciation from the platform, no appreciation from, like, sometimes from the customers too. And when the customer blame us for being late, platforms don't fight for us. They always stand with the customer, fight for the customer as their sort of money. I had a delivery from Etobicoke to Oakville, which took me 1.5 hours on the highway during a rush hour. I explained this to the customer, I explained this to the app, but even though I got a poor review, which affected me for the coming 100 orders to remove that review, and also the customer removed the tab. So the order were $22, and they removed the tab, which was $10. So I got only $12. That's an hour and a half drive, and I was like for half an hour in the grocery store to pick the items. So in 2 hours, I got only 12 hours at $12. $12, like $6 per hour. It's barely paying my gas. Thank you.
I don't know, Pierre Samuel, maybe if you want to jump in on maybe the challenges of doing collective organizing and trying to meet demands at the bargaining table with groups that are not, that are very fragmented right now in terms of their needs, and I don't know if you can touch on this.
Certainly. So right now, as I mentioned, we know that the increased flexibility around hours of work and telework is quite popular with our membership. But the discussion we're trying to have with our members regarding that is sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, because we want to be very cautious in how we approach any change to increasing the flexibility of working hours, because we have a sense in there, the past history shows us that sometimes it can become a slippery slope. What is a good idea for someone today might not be such a good idea for that same person tomorrow. So we've discussed about, people that, have different life situations that, some of them are more marginalized or vulnerable. And someone who might think that they really want to be able to have that flexibility to work, at night and weekends today. If they have a family tomorrow, they might not think it's such a good idea anymore. But if they now have this system in place, maybe their employer is not going to feel like they want it to change, and they want them to be able to go back to a regular working schedule. So this is one of the challenge that we're facing. It's very difficult in a collective agreement to find language that would apply and satisfy everyone in a certain manner. So it's interesting because so far in bargaining, the employer has been really, really eager to discuss working flexibilities with us and options. And And I think what we're going to find ourselves in is we're going to find ourselves in a situation where our definition of flexibility is not going to meet the employer definition of flexibility. In other words, the question is going to be flexibility for whom? Is it going to be the ability for the employer to schedule the employees at all sort of hours? Or is it really more empowering the employees and having more of a say as when they want to be able to work? And again, with the caveat of what we mentioned earlier, that even sometimes when you empower the employees, unfortunately, for all sort of reasons, they tend to still work longer, and some time pass to the point where they should normally work to live a healthy lifestyle. So I think the issue really is that while we have mutual collective agreement, there's still no clear rules or protection, or really a transparent system that prescribe how hours of work are assigned to a lot of our workers. So there is still a lot of management discretion with respect to assigning hours of work, and that's somewhat unusual for a union environment, but it's very specific to federal public service workers. So they're protected by what is the definition of a day of work. But if we were to change these definition, well, really nothing necessarily could stop the employer to starting to create a new kind of shift work within the day where people would work staggered hours. And we've already seen some interest from the employer, for example, in call center operation, where they have a lot of incentive to have these kind of staggered work throughout the country to be able to meet their operational needs and save office space, for example. So this is part of the reason why we've been very, very careful in our approach in collective bargaining, because even when the issues seem very simple, we often seen that we were not seeing really eye to eye with the employer on what this increased flexibility, how it would be applied and what it meant for the employees.
Thank you. Emilie, I don't know if you want to add anything to this or if you have a comment. You're fine for now?
I'm fine.
Okay. Maybe I have two questions for Lisa and Abdullah. I think that just for a common understanding, can you maybe explain what's the Flex Work Plus model that these platforms are proposing, just so we have a common understanding of what we understand by this third pillar? And maybe after, Abdullah, can you give us concrete examples of kind of like the challenges, but also kind of the good practices of collective organizing that you kind of like came across in the last years through Gig Workers United, kind of giving an idea of thinking collective organizing outside the box of the models that we normally cross and see. So I don't know, Lisa, if you want to start.
Sure. I mean, flexible work plus is it's what companies like Uber really put out this myth that workers want and need flexibility. This is the number one thing that workers want and need is flexibility, which is really interesting when you put it against other employers, like what the other folks are talking about here. So. But it is essentially a proposal to create a third category in employment standards that's not an independent contractor and not an employee, but a sort of contractor plus, which would mean still a permanent, exclusion from benefits like EEI and CPP, still no, base layer of minimum wage or applying to, working time or compensation for actual hours worked. And it's really a sort of way for these gig employers to continue their framework of their type of exploitation of workers, but to kind of make that a permanent structure, because they know that there's a battle at play here and internationally of workers demanding their full rights, and putting in a challenge to say that we're not independent contractors. Gig workers are saying we're not independent contractors, We clearly don't have control over the app. The decision we had in the Fedora case was that gig workers under Fedora were not independent contractors, that the corporation completely controlled the app, and the app is the tool of the employer. That was the decision that we got. So this is sort of Uber's death knell. This is their attempt to kind of write their own laws. You know, they tried to write their own law in California with Prop 22, and they're trying to take that on the road and either write or buy their own laws everywhere around the world. So I'll pass it to Abdullah to talk about Gig Workers United and the organizing on a hopeful note.
So to add one more point about flex work, yes, Lisa, as you said, is to keep them going with what they're doing. So when it comes to our rights like health benefits or breaks, holidays, vacations, that holiday will be independent contractor. When it comes like to change our pay, accept, reject order, right to know, right to refuse, we are treated as employees. So when it's flex plus, it's like, and it's not a third category. It's just like to keep them going with what they're doing. Highlighting the second point, like challenges about organizing and what you're doing. Like for me personally, I'm trying to do like I'm trying to outreach people with like being while on delivery or like with phone calls on streets, trying to explain. So something very challenging for us. We are afraid as we are controlled by the platforms. So whenever we have a poor rating, bad review, delayed for delivery, delayed for pickup, any small mistake from our side or comment from restaurant or customer will affect us, will affect the type of orders we receive, will dramatically change our pay. By that, drivers, couriers are afraid sometimes to get united together because they are aware that Uber might know somehow. And if they know, and like if we did a strike, they know, oh, hey, Abdullah did a strike and XYZ did a strike, stop giving them orders. They have it. Instacart have a very smart application platform. They know how many minutes I need to arrive to customer, how many minutes to the store, how many minutes to pick up each item, how many minutes while doing self-checkout. And by that, they control which orders to give me. So they're having very good customer service with their customers, but it's all about Instacart. It's not about the courier. Whenever we are late, they blame us. It's very challenging when we're getting like to get united together, because usually who do such type of job will assume that they're doing it for 3 to 6 months as I started, but then they get stuck for longer time because the more you do this job, the more your expenses is. The more you consume gas or you damage your bike or you need to maintain your car, but our pay dramatically is decreasing. So it's like it's a circle, and I'm rounding in that circle. The more I work, the more maintenance. The more I work, the more. So it's nothing much left for me. It's getting very challenging to grab food to my family on the table with gig economy. A lot of people, and like a lot of people, especially in newcomers, similar to me, where I came from a place where like there is no rights. We don't have the right to reject or the right to know what we're doing. So when I go to that phenomenon, moving to gig work, with gig work, I'll accept anything that the platform will say. Even when I get like a contract, I don't have an option to say, oh, hey, I want to discuss point F with you. I just have one option. It's either you sign it, Abdullah, or you can't access the platform. So even if I have a question like, hey, what do you mean by point F? No one answers me. Even I'm going back with the working hour time. So especially with skip the dishes, if a customer reported that they never received their food, even if I'm offline, I'm out of the work, after half an hour, Skip will call me and like, hey, Abdullah, do you remember that delivery to that address from this restaurant? Where did you leave it? So I'll be like, I followed the instruction. Or the customer said they never found it, but I'm already out of the shift. When you call me to ask me about that order, I am paid for this time. I'm paid for like, so there's even no respect. Even when I go offline, I'm trying to do something else. They're still at the back of me. So I think in this situation, I'm not independent contractor. I'm employee. When I say I'm offline, so I'm offline, but you're still calling me, right? I'm sorry for taking a long time.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. It's very interesting, and I think it links to what Lisa said about how it was possible to actually unionize Foodora workers, and I think that it's also thinking of the tools that labor regulation already offers and how we can mobilize those tools in a creative way to actually access collective organizing and collective bargaining. So, well, thank you all very much. So there's several comments that obviously are linked to what we spoke in the chat box, but I don't see any questions right now from the attendees. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. I think we were 19 to 20 around the virtual table today. So thank you very much. Thank you to our 4 speakers. It was extremely interesting. I took about 8 pages of notes, and we will surely have the chance to talk about this again. So again, thank you for everyone for being here today, and talk soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.